So, good morning, folks. Welcome to this edition of the Schusterian Logic podcast, where I talk about lessons about changing careers, moving into technology, and generally anything else that I find my audience finds interesting. So, last week I launched the podcast, and I wanted to, I threw out a lot of lessons. I upped the amount of content I had on LinkedIn, and one of the ideas that you guys really got interested in was this concept of, I called it a skill stack, but it's also been called talent stack. And there's been a number of areas that I got this from. Specifically, I start, watching Naval Ravikant, and he talks a lot about stuff that looks very much like talent stack. I got the actual term from Scott Adams, who actually talks about talent stacks quite a lot, about his own talent stack, about famous people, what they're doing there. So, you guys found that to be very interesting. One of the questions I got related to this was how to strategically expand your talent stack. And today we're going to talk a little bit about this. So, when I've talked to people and we were discussing this concept, it's saying, I used to say you need to find ways to strategically add to that. And people ask, well, how exactly do you go about doing that? How do you know what to invest in? Where do you go through? Because just because I say you want to go and build talent doesn't mean that, it's useful talent. I wouldn't think that strategically adding to your juggling skills is going to necessarily help in, with development to go through. So I understand the question on why somebody would want to go and expand. So today I'm going to go over some advice, and I guess general advice here on if you're going about and you like this idea of talent stack and you decide you want to start applying this, how do you go and do this? First piece of advice here I have is when you are building up your talent stack and you decide that's really what you want to start going into, you need to learn how to invest in foundational knowledge that goes across time, ages, and domains. So every field has its particulars that, they really value. If you're in full stack development, knowing front end development, back end, how APIs work, how HTML, how IP addresses work, I guess not IP addresses, how things like, response codes work, how response times work are really, really important. But there are certain things that underline all that, which are almost like bedrock when it comes to building a career. They're even more foundational than foundations, Here's the ones that I found to be the most useful. One, just the idea of loving learning and going through that and teaching yourself how to learn is a really, really important skill to be able to go through. Building a talent stack is going to be really, really hard if you, have no clue or don't enjoy the process of learning. If you find it to be a chore, that going from one subject to another really isn't useful, you're not going to be able to get the breadth that you're hoping for. The people who I find do the best tend to have an insatiable knowledge of learning. And again, it's not that they don't have things that they shy away from or they don't love. It's just that they love the process of learning and they go through and do that. So one thing, love learning. Other thing here is reading. I have never, ever met somebody of a really high quality that did not love learning, did love reading, or did not have tons and tons of books to go through. You can tell how involved somebody is based on the number of books they have and the direction they go through. And again, if you do audiobooks and other things like that, that's fine. But it's really knowing how to read and go through and teaching yourself are really like bedrock. If you don't have those two, really hard to build it out and keep up the energy to be able to go through that. But then beyond that, there's other areas that are really useful. One of the ones that I found that I've been most obsessed with recently is the understanding of mental models. And if you don't know Charles Munger is Warren Buffett's lesser known partner. I mean, he's now pretty well known because of, he wrote Poor Charles Almanac and, he appears with Warren Buffett all the time. So he's becoming more well known. But he has this idea of these 88 mental models, I believe it's 88, that he uses to understand the world. And it's really across domains, foundations. And he says, these are the most useful mental models. Like, here's a mental model on how finance works. And he kind of pulls the one or two ideas that are useful there and do that. Here are mental models from the hard sciences. Here are the mental models from computer science. Here are the mental models from these other areas. And he understands these things. And then when he goes into a new situation, he goes through his Rolodex in his head of all the mental models to really understand the situation, figures out where to apply it, and then goes through and then goes, implies that knowledge. That is a very useful mentality to have for somebody who wants to build a skill stack, because giving yourself that foundational knowledge of mental models will really help you understand where you want to go. And, it means that the domains are less exotic. If you want to dive into something, that, but at the very least, the minimum to understand, okay, I can understand if I'm wrong here or why other people are wrong. Another person who's come out with a really interesting foundational knowledge list is Naval Ravikant. He has a learning, a tweet, and actually I will, either post that here or I'll maybe post it below. But he goes through and says, learn these basic skills related to, work. It's like, don't go and learn business. Go instead, learn psychology, learn persuasion, learn sales, learn computers, learn game theory. And there were a couple of others there. And those, again, really are about building the foundation. They are not something that you're ever going to go into a situation and say, oh, I have basic computer science knowledge to go through, and it's going to really make you, get the job or be able to impress people. But it's the things that make all the other learnings easy. So big first concept, invest in foundational knowledge. Second big concept is really looking at your current situation and understanding the unique opportunities and learnings in front of you and investing time to be able to do those well. And I gotta say, people get so fixated on, I want to change careers, I want to move in this direction, or this is painful, I can't do this, I need to move into something else. They don't recognize that there are opportunities to learn right in front of them that are way broader than they would expect. And instead of investing to be some level of proficiency in their current level, they just decide they move off elsewhere. I'll give an example, probably one of the worst examples of this. So I had years ago, I was part of a venture capital group, and we were looking at early stage startups. And one guy came in and had this big idea for, the social media platform he wanted to build. And he had this whole idea, and he spent a lot of time thinking about this. I mean, he came into a room, showed this giant paper graph. It was very impressive, but it's like there were no clients. He was very social media driven, so it really wasn't that impressive. But then we went a little bit into his background, and it turns out that he worked for a major franchise restaurant, and he actually went into their office and he designed basically I guess it wasn't a record, like a storage system basically for their organization, where he got hired because he understood how to be able to create the operation of this back office really, really well, and that he could do that over and over again. And that's what he was employed to do. And he was something like a specialist for the headquarters of these people. And so when I looked at him, I was like, this is a really valuable skill set you have to be able to go through. It's something that you can really bed down and be able to build. And in the current terms, it's, you have ways to be able to build your skill stack. But I mean, he thought it was poison, right? It wasn't sexy, it wasn't interesting. So he thought the current opportunity wasn't very useful. So instead, he said, I want to do this other thing because it's interesting. The problem with this mentality is, even if it's not exactly where you are, you're in the place you are for some reason. You have the family connections, you have a network, you just found yourself in a place there, and the things in front of you are going to give you the best opportunities to learn. They're going to be the most unique networks. And no matter where you are, even if you think you're a server in, some restaurant, or you think you're doing some lowly job, you have network opportunities that differentiate you from everyone else. Go deep enough and you're one of one basically for those opportunities. Maybe you know a great actor and you can learn, skills there, and you can learn persuasion. Or maybe that you're running the front office of a, you're the head server of a major restaurant, and you're the one who figures out how to organize and do things that start to look like project management skills as you start to go through. Or maybe you just end up being the best server you possibly can be, and all of a sudden you understand persuasion and skills there. Just because the experience doesn't necessarily translate doesn't mean that you can't grow your skill stack. So one of the things you should do is to understand where your skill stack is unique, and do that and invest in those skills right in front of you, even if you want to go someplace else, even if you don't think it's that useful or that interesting. So really understand the unique opportunities that are already within your realm and take them seriously and invest in them, at least for some period of time. You don't have to decide it's going to be forever. As a matter of fact, the whole idea of a talent stack is that you have many, many, many different places that you could potentially go, but that you're not married to any one of them, and you only really invest very, very heavily in one. And that'll be the next episode where to go dive deep. But understand unique opportunities, do them well, and then start to build demonstrable skills in those skill stacks, things that you can figure out how to translate. So, third big piece of advice is really letting your interest and your passions lead the way on what you should learn, but having a framework to guide the outcomes to go through. So, two really important parts of that. One, let interest and passion lead the way. You are going to naturally want to learn the things that interest you. Like, that's the thing. I'm not somebody who believes that you have to be doing your passion as your main job, but the standard is lower, but you can't go below a certain level. You have to find something interesting about your work or the side work. I mean, just using myself as an example, I find generating content to be interesting. This process is interesting to me, so I'm going through and doing it. And now I'm building a skill set in what somebody might call digital marketing, but it's really content generation, speaking, maybe it's even persuasion, whatever you might call it. And you do that. Now, you might see this and think, oh, I want to be like Brian and I want to do videos. And you start to record videos and you hate it. Well, guess what? You're not going to get good enough at something you hate doing, or you don't have an interest in doing, right? An interest can mean, I think I could, just because you want to make money at it, that could be enough interest to help you get good at it. Even if you're not interested in the work itself, you could say, I think I can make money at this particular thing. So you build your skill stack for 3 months in this area. And now it's like, well, maybe I never want to create content again, but I know how to do it. Add it onto the skill stack and move on to go through. So, you can have an interest in it, but there needs to be some interest, there needs to be some passion, and then you go down, that path to basically go and grow that. But you really need to have some framework to really tie it together. Because the problem is with a lot of people who just let passion lead the way and only passion is that they never get to a point where they can really go and crystallize their skills and sell them. Like somebody who ends up being an artist for years and years and they love it and they decide, man, I want to do something with this, never really goes the final step and figures out, well, what exactly am I trying to do here? Like, even if you just love art for your own sake, you have to have something to show and sell at the end of the day. If you have thousands of paintings and you never finish any one of them, that's not going to show very well, because there's really deep learning in those last mile to really finish a project, go through and do it, and really try to, build something that you can sell, something demonstrable to the rest of the world to go through. So that's why I say, but you have to have a framework to guide you. I'm creating the micro experiences framework. This is my first article on this is coming out later this year on how you can go and use the cycle to basically get an education, go network with people, and then really get demonstrable skills so you can tie it off. But there are other, ways to do this. Just the fact of goal setting is kind of a framework around this to do this. You decide, oh, I want to be a content creator. So go create 100 articles on your LinkedIn profile, or go write 10 blogs, or go start a website and go through there. That's taking your passion and interest, tying it to some outcome, and then actually going and finishing it to go through. That's a really important part of the process to finish. If you're just letting passion lead, you're not really getting it to a point where you can actually use it, and it doesn't actually fully go onto your talent stack. You can't go sell that. Or it's not very useful because it's not impressive to anyone. You've tinkered with it, but like, where did you actually finish it? Where do you have portfolios? And you can't really fake that side of it. So you have to put an end on it. Otherwise, it's not worth adding to this. Don't get me wrong. Have hobbies, but it's a hobby. It's not something you want to go sell to someone else to do that. Versus if it's a hobby, but you think, hey, this might help me, find an end goal for it, start doing that, and find a way to integrate that into your cycle. So that's the third point. My final point here is that when you go through and look at your market, you'll get the advice to say, like, a lot of what you're doing through boot camps, or a lot of what people are doing, is trying to look like their peers. And I don't think I have to tell you that. That's an important part, and that should be a lot of your early learning in particular. But one of the things you should do, especially for really interesting talent stacks, is you should understand what your peers are doing and then deliberately invest time in something none of them are doing. So understand what your peers are doing, strategically invest in something that none of them are doing, just to see what happens. So this is a concept I talk about related to seeing education taking risks with your education. Like, for example, if you are a part of a full stack development group and you notice none of them really, none of your full stack developer peers really tried to integrate AI into their framework. And then you see an opportunity where you see either a new tool, a language, something else interesting, you may go and say, I want to go and see if I can integrate this AI framework into my full stack, if that brings something interesting to the table. So you go and learn it, learn it, network with people who do AI, integrate that opportunity, find an opportunity to use it in your work, to say, here's an AI framework, here's a chatbot, here's something else, to bring it in and go through and bring it back to the group and say, I tried integrating AI. We'll see to do that. And it may not work out, or it could be the secret sauce. Or you say, I'm interested in developing, Docker files, and it's going into a cloud framework, but serverless seems interesting, and none of my peers really invest in that. Or a small number of peers do that, but it's not really serious or no one takes that. But I think there's something interesting over there. So I'm going to learn serverless for a period of time. And you go and invest in serverless technology, go through, deploy that, invest, capstone the experience, come back and say, okay, maybe you didn't get anything out of it. That's the risky part of it. But now I know how to do something different and something that may be useful in the future. What you're doing is you're taking strategic risks on interesting skill stack combinations to see if it might be useful in the future to open up new opportunities. And there's something that's very specific to me. So that serverless example was actually not not random. It was something I actually did in 2016. I was a cloud engineer. I learned AWS, and they had this new framework called serverless. And I got serverless. It's like, okay, instead of managing your own servers, just deploy code and let it run. Sounds fantastic. No one I knew really gave a damn about it. Even people who were in cloud, even people who did this for a living, they didn't seem to care. So I'm like, okay, well, I just got an Echo. And they just opened up their skill stores. I'm going to go and learn how to build apps there. And I basically built apps. I went and I tinkered around. I mean, I did some awful apps to begin with. I think I did the price of Dogecoin for one of them, and then for a few others, when I got a little bit more competent, I started doing like Powerball numbers, to do that, and then other little apps to go through. And what I eventually did is, like, I capstoned it. I put it on my website. I put it on my LinkedIn. I said that I did this. I promoted it, and no one seemed to give a damn. It's like, okay, fine. No one cares. But I learned a little bit of Lambda. I learned how to do serverless applications. I learned more about AWS. So that started to be used in my job. I found new opportunities to use AWS. I used Lambda in my job, but nothing really breakthrough. Later that year, I was looking for a new job, and I just happened to put out that I knew Lambda, and I knew it well enough. I've been using it for a year, and I went through and did that. And then all of a sudden, somebody in New York found my resume. I was at a consulting firm, and they saw that I had this background. And they went and thought, hey, you have a really interesting background because of Lambda. And I'm like, really? And he was like, yeah, we could use you. So I went, okay, fine. I did the technical interview, and it was like I was assuming, okay, clearly I'm not going to have the background interesting. I just use this for apps. No way I'm interesting. It was one of the easiest technical interviews I've ever had in my life. It was like, what does Lambda, what languages are used in Lambda? It's like, okay, Java, C++, Python, or whatever it was at the time, and some things about timeouts. So we could tell I did that. And turns out they couldn't find anyone in the market who had it. I had a cloud engineering background. I had a BI background. And those things were good. They were prerequisites. But the addition of Lambda to my skill stack at that time, which I had no clue was useful, but it just happened to be on my resume, did that, made me interesting to this one guy. And that's how I ended up getting a job in New York. And it was one of the funnest years I've ever had. I spent a week in Indianapolis, a week in New York. I was working for A&E Media. I got to experience that lifestyle, which is something I've always wanted to do. And it was just a ton of fun to go through. So if you think that you're going out there, because you might say, AI looks interesting, quantum computing looks interesting, or maybe it's even just, it's a common thing, but it's something people don't do. If you are a data developer and none of the people know full stack development, that could be an interesting combination where it's like, okay, I know data, but I also know how to build a full stack application. Maybe not super well, but well enough that you can, trounce your peers, or maybe you're the only DBA who happens to understand how to, build an okay looking React app. That could be very valuable to do that. But you have to think in terms of being risky and that there's not going to be an ultimate end there. So to wrap up here, because this episode's getting a little bit long, when you want to strategically expand your skill stack, one, invest in foundational knowledge that goes below all of that. Love learning, love reading, learn about mental models, go through Naval Ravikant's learning, and I'll post that tweet in the description here, to learn about what big foundational knowledge looks like. You want to understand the unique opportunities that are sitting in front of you, and don't sleep on them. Actually take them seriously. Figure out, how can I get the most out of this opportunity in front of me before I leave and before I go off elsewhere. Those build interesting skills. 3, you want to let interest in your personal passions lead the way on what you should be studying, but have a way to be able to capstone those things, to figure out how you can actually crystallize crystallize the experience, sell it to other people, add it to a resume, add it to a portfolio, so you can actually showcase to others that you actually have this. And then finally, understand what your peers are doing, and then deliberately invest into something that none of them are doing, but you think might be useful. Or you're just interested in it, and it just happens to be something that falls into, what you do there. You should be risky with your education opportunities and still crystallize it. So anywho, that's my episode on, the talent stack. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about, so you're building a wide set of experiences, but how do you know where to go deep? How do you know where, what is the thing that I should be really investing the most time into? And where does the well of that T-shaped person really exist? And so for that, we'll be talking about that tomorrow. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today.